Welcome back to the Football Fitness Federation podcast. This is episode 333. I welcome back my co-host, Jordan Tyra. How are we, Jordan?
I'm good, thanks. A big 333. Lucky for
Three,
some.
333. He's fresh from a trip to London, which I'm
Yeah.
sure we'll get into at some point. And we welcome back onto the podcast. It's been far too long, but he's been with us in spirit because he's been supplying us guests left, right, and centre, which I'm very appreciative of. David O'Connor, how are we doing?
Morning, lads. An absolute pleasure to be back. Thanks for having us. Much appreciated. And yeah, I'll continue to do the groundwork over here. I think you guys would obviously have good contacts across the UK, and I think maybe here in Ireland we're not always great at shouting about the work we do. So anyone I know or trust, yeah, absolutely send them on to you. Because there's some good people doing some really good work over here. So it's good to give them an opportunity to speak loud and proud about what they're doing.
100%. And all those episodes as well, which we might touch on a little bit as we go through, none of them have disappointed. So keep them coming, David. If there's anyone that comes up of interest that you see doing good work, this is what we're all about here. Obviously, some people will recognize names that come on the podcast, others won't. And that's part of the point of it, that we like to highlight good work going on. And yeah, there's definitely plenty of that I know going on over in Ireland as well. So no, I really appreciate it, mate. Now we did a podcast way back, episode 174. So for anyone that's not checked that one out, you can go and give that one a listen. But anyone that's not listened to that, Dave, will you just give us a little bit of breakdown on you, your career, and also what you currently do as well?
Yeah, suppose I'm a long time kind of at the one club, which may be a bit unusual. I'm very lucky. I work with my childhood club, with Shelbourne over here in Dublin. I stopped playing at a very young age. So I was about 24, 25 is when I actually stopped playing. And the reason I stopped playing was I had a lot of kind of mental health issues that back then, I didn't really know how to deal with. And I think probably every issue that was sort of affecting me throughout my day to day seemed to kind of come out in a football pitch. So I was quite petulant, very low in confidence, very aggressive. And I just didn't enjoy it, to be honest with you. So I actually stopped playing. I think if that was today, you'd probably be in a better position, to seek out a little bit of support. I suppose it was different times, but look, I've no regrets in the sense that it sort of opens, one door closed, another one opened, and I was always interested in fitness, and it led me down the road of sort of working in a coaching capacity within the club with under 18s, under 19s. And whilst it began sort of with more technical coaching, I suppose that the philosophy, I suppose if you call it, that I've always had is like be the coach and the leader that I never had. And I think that's something quite common, I think, across the board with different coaches and practitioners. But it was a good kind of lead in. I think I found myself sort of more interested, as I said, around the fitness and physical performance space. So kind of leaned into that a little bit. Worked, as I said, with our underage structure for quite some time. I stepped up to our first team men's. I worked with Kevin Doherty, who's a very well respected coach and manager over here. Bit of a club legend. He's since gone on and he's managing Drogheda United now, but he's absolutely fantastic. And to, I suppose idolise him growing up as a player, to work with him in a professional capacity then was just superb in terms of learning. And similarly, then the manager that came in after him, on here, who was a club captain for years, probably one League of Ireland player back throughout the 90s and 2000s that maybe could have got a cap for Ireland. You take into account who was ahead of him. You had Steve Finn and Stephen Carr. There was serious, talent available at right full, but he was, again, just in terms of leadership, superb. To work with him, he really, really pushed me in terms of just having that thick skin, just to look after myself in the game, because as much as we love it, we all know it can be pretty ruthless and cruel at times. So yeah, that was kind of over a 10-year period. I became a dad then, so took a little bit of a breather. which I'd advise for anybody to do if they can. It's very hard, as we know, balancing sort of family and football, but took the year out. And then for the last 5 years, I was brought back in then working with our senior women's team. And this is interesting because I remember I attended your event in Manchester, and kind of as an icebreaker, you got everybody to sort of speak. And one of the questions you said was discuss maybe, one decision you've made in your career that has, changed the trajectory or been a good decision. And for me, it was stepping in with that women's team. For numerous reasons, I think. Firstly, for me, like it's given me so much confidence in myself. It's given me a lot of space because there wasn't much there in terms of foundations before I went in. So there was a lot of freedom. But then the timing as well, stepping into women's football, as we know, it's just exploded. And then obviously in Ireland, we a couple of years later, we qualified for our first World Cup. We had a lot of our girls involved, or, a lot of our sort of homegrown girls that maybe had gone to England professionally and were involved in the squad. So there was a lot of sort of emotional attachment, a lot of pride associated with it from our club. And yeah, that's kind of 5 years now, and here I am. I'm still here, part of the furniture. They can't get rid of me. So yeah, it's probably a bit unusual, maybe, I'm not too sure, but to work in different sort of corners of the same club, but all great experiences, and I'm still enjoying the work I'm doing now. So 15, 16 years later.
Awesome, mate. I know you've got obviously the work with the club, but you do work outside the club as well, which I know we'll touch on and go into a bit more detail. But do you just want to give us a bit of an overview of what that actually looks like?
Yeah, I tried. I had my own sort of studio in terms of a gym practice at one stage, and if I'm honest with you, I just struggled with the overheads. It was very, very difficult to run a sort of a clinic on your own. Now, look, I suppose a bit of time, knowledge, a bit more experience, if I was to go into that again, I'd maybe approach it a little bit differently. But I suppose to figure out a way, how can you keep doing something you love and do it as a business? Like, I do a lot of pitch-based sessions, and for me, there's two loves in my life outside of me kids, of course, like it's football and running. So it was like, how can I combine the two of them? So I try my best to coach and teach players of all levels, the foundations of running mechanics and get people moving better. So I've been doing that probably 5 or 6 years on the grass. Obviously, summertime, you'd see a bit more of a sport with brighter evenings and that, but it's brilliant because a lot of the players that would come would be young, and the best way to sum it up, I suppose, from a coaching point of view, is that your ultimate KPI is somebody walking back in the gate a week later with a smile on their face, or the body language is a bit more relaxed. And that's how I try and encourage it. But look, it's like everything. It's the people who come back will see will see progress in terms of their movements, in terms of their jumps, their speeds, whatever it may be. But you're just trying to build good habits. That's what it goes down to. And it's interesting. It's a very, as we know, it's a very different, I suppose, dynamic coaching one-on-one for an hour than taking an entire squad of 30 people. It's very, very different. And it's allowed me to kind of explore and reflect upon kind of my coaching style in both sort of capacities. And I sort of always thought I was this very energetic, sort of 100 miles an hour coach, encouraging and pushing people on. But what I've really learned is I'm actually quite the opposite. I'm very sort of calm in my approach. I don't raise my voice much. And in many ways, like I often say, like my sessions would probably be 15 minutes if I shut up talking, because we just end up kind of in between on breaks, kind of going down all sorts of avenues. And yeah, it's been good from that point of view. And I'd stand over the work that gets done. It's a lot of foundational work. I maybe package it and give it a fancy name, but you're ultimately just teaching people how to move and trust their own bodies.
And with that, Dave, that's really, really interesting. We'll come back to that in a second, just on your coaching style from one-to-one to group. But with your approach to running mechanics, combining it with football, is it majority footballers coming to see you? I know you've got different ages, or have you got different sports as well?
It's predominantly football, and I look at like will attract like. So, that's tend to what kind of happens is that someone will come down and a teammate will want to come down. We're obviously Gaelic football is massive over here. I've maybe about 15% of athletes that come could be Gaelic or hurlers. But I think just because of my environment and what I'm involved in, it's predominantly footballers. And mostly teenagers. So, look, I'm open to working with anybody. Somebody who's interested in learning and progression, you'll give them the time. But as I said, I think it's probably just as a result of where I am, maybe what the reputation I have in terms of the sport I'm involved, that brings in a lot of footballers. So, yeah, as I said, probably 80% plus is footballers.
With those teenagers, then, Dave, let's focus in on that. What are some sort of big rocks? What are some of the foundations that you're focusing on in terms of gait, in terms of running technique?
Yeah, so look, I'm very cautious, particularly if as a parent, maybe will ring you up. And the first thing I try and do is put people at ease, because I think if a teenager is getting it from a parent, I've booked you in with Dave, you can see it straight away as they walk in. It's like, this guy is going to have me doing doggies up and down a pitch for an hour, and it's absolutely not the case. I think a lot of it, what I focus on is a lot of balance and coordination work. Thinking about your movements, of focusing more on your technique as opposed to just bursting out of traps going full blast. Because my attitude is, it's like, you guys do enough. I want you leaving feeling better about yourself, not crawling out the door being absolutely exhausted. So, look, I'll generally start a session with, I suppose that the framework of the session will be just your standard FIFA warm-up, because that's what they're used to try and put them at ease. Maybe a little bit of a groundwork with prehab. Bring it in then to sort of extensive plyos, which when you're going from double to single leg, it'll give you a good idea of sort of how they're moving anyway, particularly when you go to single leg. You're getting a good look at them, but they don't feel as if they're being tested. So it's just a nice way to do it. From the plyos, I'll move into kind of just mechanics drills, and it'll usually be very basic. You'll start off with your marches on the spot, over 5 meters, over 10 meters, bring in a band, get them rotating, moving up and down with the band. And again, just to test that movement in different planes. From the mechanics down, we'll have a look then at acceleration, and that could be something as simple as a half kneeling start over 5 meters, or a standing start side on. And again, just to see how are they rotating the hip, and see how they feel on both legs. Because particularly with anything kind of, as you know, when you're switching from your standing leg to your kicking leg, there's generally a difference. So it's a real nice subtle way to get that question in, like, oh, how did that feel compared to right or left? And it'll get them talking, thinking about their body. From that then, we'll go into a little bit of power work. So that could be like broad jumps, it either be 3 in a row or get out and jog backwards. From that then, we'll try and get out of straight lines, just working sideways, front, bit of decel, small bit of change of direction. And that would be an initial session. To be honest with you, from what we see, you might try and shape it eventually to be a little bit more individualized. Or then you could flip it then and do a little bit more kind of emphasis on the change of direction or the decel work, and which is something I think has obviously been a bit more prominent in women's game as well. And I think from my point of view, someone I've learned so much from is Alan Jordan, who you've had on a good few times. You've had him presenting as well. I think the work he does is absolutely fantastic, and I've taken so much from him. He's very kindly jumped on a call with me as well recently. Allowed me to pick his brain. So, and it goes back to what we were saying there, like just learning from each other. But just that's generally the initial framework of the session. It can, I suppose, in terms of how it evolves, it can be quite organic as well. Somebody might come down to you and say, I've nothing on this week. Okay, we can maybe push the boat out a little bit, or the polar opposite. I've got 4 games, 2 school exams so as bizarre as it might sound, we're particularly in a team space where you are trying to plan over blocks of maybe 6 or 8 weeks. I think with the one-on-ones, you maybe have to look at it in a little bit more short term in terms of planning the sessions, but then also, letting them know that look, just because you haven't nailed this in a week or two, you're going to be playing football for the next 20 years. So don't panic. There's absolutely no rush here. So look, I hope that's an appropriate kind of summary of some of the work that gets done.
Yeah, that's more than answered the question. I love the sort of common sense approach to coaching. Like you've talked about how you structure a session, like exactly what I asked, the big sort of rocks that you're looking for, the foundations that you're looking for with players, but talked about how that can essentially that's your screen without mentioning screening, without mentioning testing, isn't it? You've talked about that there. But then the other thing that you just put onto the end of it there was essentially the monitoring side of speaking to the players, finding out what they've got on, finding out what the week looks like, finding out those sort of windows of opportunity. So I know, Jordan, I'm sure you've got something to add to this, but I just love that approach that you've ticked all boxes, talked about it in a very simple way, but I think that's exactly what's needed at that time, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think just jumping in on what Ben's saying there to you, like there's so many points you raised there which you can gloss over, and then you actually think about it. They're really, really important. So I think the warm up, like you say, using that as an assessment tool is massively underrated. And it came up a lot with our FSCR event, and actually a lot of our events recently. We've been chatting about the use of technology now in our industry. It is more than ever before, and obviously it's very, very important that we're informing ourselves on data driven processes and stuff. But like we're starting to feel certainly these networking meetings, a lot of people are starting to say like we're forgetting about the coach's eye. And then what you're saying there, Dave, in terms of like the warm up is that chance to develop that player, and you can do it from the coach's eye. Like you say, when you're going from the double leg to a single leg plyo, and you're seeing they're all over the place, you go, well, brilliant. Like, I know where they're at pretty much. I can put them in that bucket that we know they're not quite advanced enough yet for single leg plyos, etc. That's just come from a warm up, So if that didn't need, you want to getting a player on a four stex and then doing, double leg, 10-5 or hop test and then going onto a single leg to find that out, you could do it from just watching it. And I think that's really, really important. So, and then just a quick one on the philosophy, because I love this when you said your philosophy was basically how you want to coach and be that sort of mentor that you never had. I think that's really important. And again, tying this back to the FSCR meeting last week, it's very, very great timing. Their whole facility came about because the two guys who created a facility that they wish they'd had as a player. And I think when you break it down, a lot of us coaches in this industry, we have that same mentality. I think you hit the nail on the head that we want to work in this industry because we didn't have somebody that helped or help them with a run-in or help them with their strength and power development or help them rehab an injury in a certain way, and then that sort of infuses us to go into that industry. So yeah, awesome points in there. The one I wanted to pick your brains on was what percentage of players, you did touch on it, but what percentage of players are coming to you saying I want to get faster versus how many are saying I want to be a bit more agile? So is it predominantly right, we go straight line first, then change of direction, or is it some that you come in and go, actually, let's just go straight into change of direction work?
I found that's actually interesting because it's the senior players that might come to you. I find a lot of their questions are more position. It's based around their position. So I had a girl in over the off season. So sorry, just for context, our season here is March to October. So our off season is obviously over the Christmas period. But with a girl who kind of played sort of, on the left of a back five, and she sort of felt, well, I'm not quick on the turn when I have to, a winger pushes past me. But I think what's interesting, it brings in a whole conversation around the language we use in football, because I'm going to tie this in with maybe some of the stuff the parents say, because you say, oh, well, little Tommy isn't quick or he's not fast. And when you actually get into that, it could mean something totally different. Like when you ask the player, if you're saying, well, your dad maybe feels you're not quick. What do you think? And it's like, is that over 5 yards, 10? Is this when you're racing in training against a fella you're not going to be playing against anyway? So, you're trying to get an idea of, well, what does actually quick mean to you? But with that player, anyway, sorry to go back to senior player, we actually look back at the videos and we said, well, let's pick a couple of examples to see, are you being a little bit harsh on yourself, or are you actually really good? And then we'll have a look at it. We can put some times on it. We can see how you're moving. And interestingly, when we looked at it, a lot of the time she was at her best was actually when she was against some of the quickest players in the league. So it is interesting. And I was saying, look, there's a mental side to that. I said, because you're probably on your toes and a bit more alert because you know this one's an absolute flyer. So sorry, I suppose I'm expanding and going a little bit off there in terms of your question, but definitely senior, it can be a little more specific to, I suppose, a position that they're trying to be an expert in. Junior, it is a bit more general at the start. And again, over the course of 2-3 sessions, as I said, you try and get that look at them in the different sort of demands anyway, as I said, whether that is linear or changing direction or curved. You'll try and bring a little bit of it in just to have a look and see. But as I said, I keep going back to just telling them, like, not to panic. Like, you're 14, don't worry. There's no panic here if you can't beat someone in training. The important thing is just you're at a good age to start building these foundations and give yourself a bit of a springboard for when you get a little bit older. So yeah, again, sorry, I hope that answers your question.
No, it does. Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good. I don't know if you've listened to JB's podcast from last week yet, JB Marin, but from some of the stuff that you're saying really resonates with what he spoke about. So he was talking about getting players in and improving them from wherever they're currently at. So not necessarily having like a blueprint of I want to get all players to X. It's this player is in this player is here at the minute. What can we do to improve them? And that just ties in really nicely and like a real life example of what you've just given with that player on saying not only how do we get you better than what you are currently, let's have a look at some of firstly, let's see what the real picture is. And that comes from game. So we have a look at video and we see where they're at currently. So let's get the real picture of where we're at, not what we feel. Let's actually have a look. But then also, like, what are the steps then to improve? And that's exactly it. It just resonates really nicely with his podcast, which is a couple of podcasts ago, actually, I think, 331 with JB. He spoke about loads of things that you're actually talking about here, Dave, as well.
Well, I tell you, you're putting me in a category with him. I'll take that. And there's a man who knows his stuff, in fairness.
No, but it's true. It's true. And I think you just added a real life example to it, which is perfect. I think that, again, we've spoke about it before, that you spoke about essentially screening players, monitoring players, and then using that sort of monitoring where you're speaking to players without using those phrases. Now we've talked about adding video to that as well. So you've got a lot of like actual analysis and screening going on in the background without specifically diving into those phrases in that language. And just to bring up language, before I forget to go back to it, you spoke before about the difference of you as a coach, one-to-one to group. Let's dive into that a little bit more because that's really interesting. You've obviously got both of that going on at the minute where you step into the team environment, but then you also are in that one-to-one environment. Do you feel like for you, there is a very different personality that you have to sort of bring out within a team and an individual? You've sort of touched on the individual already, but how does that differ to being in that environment where you've maybe got 16, 20 players in front of you?
Yeah, an interesting one with the team piece. So I'd be obviously very personable, very chatty with the players, and I'm always there in terms of somebody needs a chat or whatever, and I have a great relationship individually with everyone on the team. The biggest thing I've learned and this is probably since we spoke, obviously what we do with the exposure the league is getting, it's getting quicker, more intense. We know all that. I've sort of learned to give them a bit more space and actually appreciate a bit of silence, if I'm honest with you. So not just filling the void for the sake of it. And that sometimes you don't actually have to say anything. You can kind of just stand back. I do laugh. I have the rule of threes. When you're explaining a drill, you'll always have to say it 3 times. But generally after that, I've just sort of learned I don't have to go and speak just because it's quiet. Like, that's okay. And we've some big personalities in the group, and they're fantastic. They do a brilliant job of filling the silence anyway. Like, so yeah, that's one thing I've just learned is don't rush in to just fill the void. It's all right not to open your mouth sometimes. In terms of the coaching speak, I think you probably be careful how I phrase this. You maybe have to be a little bit louder getting your point across. And I don't mean shouting. I don't raise my voice and shout, but just purely because you have so many bodies. I think keeping your instruction just as clear, concise, and as quickly as possible. It just comes into it on the pitch. And it's interesting where we train is just to the left of Dublin Airport. So we have planes going by literally every 2 minutes. And it's we're well used to it now, but it's literally like, hold on a second till that plane goes over so I can make me point. Like, but yeah, I that's probably the one thing. I think just appreciating silence. It's okay just to stand back, let them have a little bit of time. They could be still thinking of last Saturday, and somebody could be thinking where they weren't playing, how did they play? You just, there's a lot going on. You have a lot of different personalities, a lot of people there. So yeah, you don't always need Dave to go in and start spouting nonsense at every opportunity, at every break. So yeah, that's one thing I've come to learn. Just appreciate a bit of silence. It's not a bad thing.
I think that's a great point. Really good point. And with that then, Dave, what do you enjoy the most at the minute? Do you enjoy the one-to-one more than the team, or do you like that balance of having both?
I do like the balance, yeah. There's a great energy with a team though, isn't there? Do you know when you get a good session from everybody and, the manager's happy, the players enjoyed it. There's a buzz that I think when the time comes and you're finished with teams, I think you'd miss that. But then again, when you go to the one-on-ones, if you do just start to see that little pocket of progress, that's really nice. And you can see the body language, you can see people standing that little bit taller. That's nice as well. So I suppose they're two very different approaches, but I do enjoy both of them. I know it's like saying that, they're asking what your favourite child is, but I think ultimately, listen, I wouldn't do either if I didn't enjoy it. I think would be fair. Like, there's definitely, there will be more intensity to the teamwork for obviously what we're trying to chase and achieve. But no, there's definitely enjoyment in both approaches, yeah.
Dave, do you think, I'll just go back to when you said you're coaching the players in a group setting and not always, having to fill a void and be constantly talking. Do you think your time as a player helped develop that attitude a little bit? Because you said it yourself, they might still be thinking about last Saturday, and you had a time as a player where you weren't always enjoying it. You're probably in your own head a little bit too much. Do you think that's seeped into how you coach now in terms of a group setting?
Yeah, I think probably the life experience as well, just a little bit of emotional intelligence. And I think being a little bit more secure in myself as well, because I think when you are a little bit younger, a little bit insecure, I think you do feel, I better say something here. I better make it sound like I know what I'm talking about. And look, I'm very lucky. As I said, I'm a long time with the team, and I do feel I have that trust and respect, and it's mutual. I'm just trying to think maybe when I go back as a player, maybe as a younger player, like did you have, I think we all had that moments where, yeah, you did coach or a manager and you're just like, yeah, will you just give us a minute, please? Like, I don't know. I didn't, it's a hard one because there weren't too many coaches I really looked up to or took on. I probably learned most from my dad in terms of principles and values. Like my dad was an absolute baller. Like he was like Seamus Coleman on steroids. Like he was unbelievable. And a very stoic gentleman, very true to his sort of values, and that, look, you work hard, you respect people who are given their time, you give to the game, and then when you're done, you're done. So I've learned probably a lot from him as opposed to maybe coaches and managers that I played for.
That's another great point, mate. Let's dive into some of the work that you're doing with the first team now, because I know when we were talking about topics, you mentioned about the female health education program that you've developed and you run with the team. So let's get into that. We obviously had the episode with Hannah Sheridan where she spoke about the work that she's done at Spurs. So it'll link in really nicely. So if people are interested in this topic as well, I'd encourage you to go and check out that episode too, because they're doing some great work at Spurs. But what was the initial approach to adding that program in with the team there?
Yeah, well, look, I think what you've got to look at here is the club as a whole. It's how the club has evolved over the last 10 years has been nothing short of incredible. When I was with the men's as a coach, we were in the second division or first division as it is over here. We were getting probably 300 people at the game, and that was on the back of being demoted in 2006. There was just such a geez, we need a whole podcast to go into the history of the club. But look, following such a fallow period, we got back promoted. The club put Damien Duff in charge, who I'm sure you guys will remember, probably Ireland's best footballer. And within 3 years, he won the league. We haven't won the league since 2006. The games are selling out every week. You've thousands going down. And look, he speaks his mind. He's a character that probably hasn't been in the league in a long time, and gets a lot of attention. And he's brought a lot of attention to the league. So with that, obviously, comes the commercial side. It brings the whole thing up. The girls' team, we've won a league, we've won a double, we've won a cup. So that's been very successful as well. So look, the whole dynamic around the club has shifted. And obviously what that's allowed us to do is approach the club kind of year on year from the point of view of the women's team and its progress, and just ask for that little bit more every year. And maybe being sensible about it as well. I think it's like when you go in asking for a pay rise, you know what you ask for, you're not going to get. So, we've just tried to be clever. So look, myself, the physio, the manager, we kind of presented a couple of things and said, look, we've an opportunity here to move this on. And look, the obvious area in terms of expertise that I can't provide is around the menstrual cycle, female health in its entirety. So we're very lucky. Again, it goes back to the contacts we have. We've connected with some good people to come in. And Keneally is the physio with the Ireland women's team, and she's absolutely fantastic. A lot of our girls would know her just from coming up through the youth teams with Ireland, and some of them being involved in the senior team. And that's her area of expertise around pelvic health, menstrual cycle. And to have it coming from her is absolutely fantastic. And that's been the start point. So she's covered some just brilliant insight, not just for players, but obviously for us as coaches as well. Like, she's gone through obviously the menstrual cycle and performance. And the biggest thing the manager took from that, he was saying afterwards, he said, actually just taking into account like the concentration levels that could be affected. He said that's probably something he never really looked at. Other than that, we're going through the likes of pelvic health, which is brilliant because it's not even related to performance. It's just looking at female health away from sport. And that was absolutely fantastic. Breast health as well as another one, maybe one that's a little bit under pushed, but very relevant. And I think particularly when you look at, like we're talking of technology there, you're looking at the sports bras having to wear an additional top for a GPS pod. So it goes back to discussions around comfort for girls. On top of that, then just your performance nutrition, looking at sleep. So it's just bit by bit. So our sort of what we started with is just having an expert in one a month, providing kind of practical information, giving the girls something to take away and work on, and just you. And that to me, that's a good start. And we hope that, if we can just tie it in with the work we're doing as a team as well. Myself and the physio obviously work very closely together. Nicole looks after check-ins. She gets a lot of information from the girls around how they're feeling at the start of a week, any symptoms they have. And the reassurances we're giving to players is, look, we're not using this information to hold against you. We're using it to defend you. And it's exactly like we're going to the manager there and saying, look, just keep an eye on Jenny. If she's a little off it tonight, here's why. And so the management know. And it's for me, I'd be very reluctant to take a player out of training. I don't think I'd have liked that as a player. But as I said, it's just more so everybody's aware, it very subtly and quietly, that, as I said, if somebody is a little bit off, that we know why. And yeah, look, that's how we're building this. It's slow, it's steady, and we'll continue to push the club and try and building it as best we can. But look, you said me. I've put this together. It's everyone. No one person can push these things. It's everybody. If nobody buys in, it goes nowhere. So the feedback has been good from the players. It's been beneficial for them, for the management, and as I said, for me and the physio then as well. So it helps everybody, and yeah, we'll keep pushing it as best we can, kind of month on month, year on year.
Well, ultimately, Dave, that must build a lot of trust from the players, though, mustn't it? They must think that they've got our backs here, like they're really trusting us.
Yeah, and particularly because it's such a male dominant staff. Everything we do, it's not, everything we do has to have a benefit, because our time is so tight, our resources are tight. We can't just do something for the sake of it. So when we do something, we want to make sure it's impactful and positive for the girls. And they're great. You can talk to them quietly and like you say, listen, what do you think? And if they don't like it, they'll tell you. And that's what you want. You want honest feedback. But with this, so far, so good. It's been beneficial. And yeah, look, as I said, hopefully it's something we can just keep on top of, keep it relevant and keep people interested. But the information, the education we've all gotten so far, it's yeah, as I said, it's a good foundation. So far, so good.
Where do you think the girls have experienced the most benefit from applying that program, Dave?
I think the pelvic health piece was really interesting. That was really impactful. There were a lot of questions around that. There was a lot that even in terms of their own bodies, they weren't familiar with. And I think the fact it was based around health as opposed to performance. So you had people kind of thinking beyond football. That was a real eye-opener. And the plan actually, as part of the curriculum, is to sort of build on that, but do it in a practical way. So do it as a gym session, as a prehab session based purely around pelvic health. So I think if you put that, what you're looking at on the screen, into practice as well, I think will help people learn a little bit further. But that was definitely the one that got big traction. And they were really positive in the discussion about it afterwards. And again, as a coach, as you're looking at some of the stats that were coming back, some things again, like around incontinence, that type of area as well, that you just kind of, in our ignorance, you don't think of it when you're coaching a group. So there was so much that was brought to light from both players' point of view and for management and coaches as well. So yeah, that was the one that certainly opened my eyes as well.
And just to add a bit more detail into that, what were some of the key standouts for the girls around the pelvic health?
So one thing that I know, I'm going to make a balls of the stat, but it was a very high percentage, 60% plus of teenage girls that suffer incontinence and are uncomfortable, obviously, training if this is what they're dealing with. So that was, because I remember when that was put up, I kind of thought to myself, is that the general population? And I was like, no, that's actually athletic population, which was even more frightening. So that, as I said, that was an eye opener for me. You were like, Jesus, like how uncomfortable that must be for somebody in a group setting. So other than that, look, there was a lot of discussion, obviously, relating to postpartum, that type of area as well. But yeah, it was very vast, Ben. It's actually quite difficult to sort of sum it up, but I think what I took from it, actually bringing it back to what we do day to day, was actually, do you know what, we're doing okay here with our prehab, because we do a lot of work around groin, hip, a lot of kind of pelvic movements. So that was a positive from our point of view, because you're sort of, you can second guess yourself a lot, but I remember kind of looking at sort of some of the stuff that was talked about and thinking, all right, we're covering some bases here. So again, that gives us something to work on. Because you do, particularly, we go back then, you're talking about the one-on-ones and that you're saying the last thing you want to do is do damage to anybody. So that little bit of reassurance that we're covering a couple of areas that need to be covered was positive as well.
It's just highlighted a topic we should probably cover at some point, and that's pregnancy.
Yeah,
because that we've not touched on that before, but obviously it's been. I think there's some players in the female game that have been well documented that have gone away, had a baby, come back and played at the top level. So I think there's probably loads we could cover around that. So that's definitely a topic for the future. That one, Jordan, we'll jot that one down. No, I think that was really good, Dave. I think that gives great insight, especially obviously anyone working with either female players or female teams. I think one of the key points is pulling from experts. There's a lot of experts that are going to be out there, isn't there? And trying to get, if there's not something like this in place with your players at the minute, it probably needs to be something you're proactively putting together or seeking the right advice at the right time from the right person. Because Dave just covered there the importance of it and what the girls are taking away from it as well.
Yeah, and I think as well, like, look, as male coaches, we need to know our stuff. 100%. We need to know what we're working with. We need to know all the background knowledge. But I'll hold my hands up. I'm not comfortable standing up presenting to girls on the effects of a menstrual cycle as a man. And I'd rather, push the club for that additional expenditure to get an expert in, because everybody benefits then. So, knowing your own limitations, I think, as well is important. Because I don't know, maybe some male coaches would be. I wouldn't be comfortable doing it.
No, I think it's a great point. Great point. Let's move on to some of your mentorship, the work that you do, Dave, as well. Because I don't think you mentioned it yet, but I know you do some work with young coaches. They can pull from the experience that you've had. What are some of the common challenges that you see young coaches facing at the minute, whether it's industry, whether it's anything sort of on a technical basis, coaching, like what are some of the key challenges that you see them face?
Yeah, just quickly, what I will say, I have to give our mutual friend Evie Casagrande some credit for this, because he's been a wonderful mentor for me and is absolutely brilliant at giving you a pat on the back and a kick up the arse at the same time. So she's the one that kind of pushed me to do this, because she was like, you have extensive experience, particularly in women's football, when not a lot of coaches do. So, everyone's experience has value, share it. So it came from that. I had 8 coaches jump on board. My nerves were absolutely shot. I think when you put yourself out there like that, naturally enough, you're opening yourself to the elements. But it was a lot of young coaches very early in their career, the cohort that came in. I think the biggest one, and it's something that's come up before, is people being afraid to say no to the first role they're offered. And what I tried to say, I tried to present throughout the mentorship of being really honest about every mistake I've ever made, and you use this as your learning tool, and I kind of gave the example about when I went into the men's first team and just trying to be all things to everyone. I was only short of being the club chef at one stage, so, and I said, look, ultimately we know this, when you're at the other end of it, it actually gets you nowhere. It probably knocks you back, but there's definitely a fear, particularly over here, where maybe, it's perceived there aren't many roles within teams. So when the first one comes along, it's like, I better take that. Maybe the discussion around internships and money is for another day, but taking that out of it, I was trying to say to people, create, whether it's a list of questions that are designed from your own values as a person, to explore what's on offer in a little bit more depth. And that could be as simple as actually meeting a potential manager face to face to see, are the two of you a right fit? Never mind the team. Are you going to get on with the manager? Is he going to get on with you? And as I said, don't be afraid to say no, because opportunities will. I think once you're proactive, opportunities will come up. But that's definitely a big one. People just, I'm finished college, quick, I'll jump in there. That looks great. And suddenly you've spent a year, just with a tracksuit on, and you've actually learned nothing because there's someone else doing everything, and you're just there to fill up water bottles or, to be another number. So if that is the case and it's a senior team, would you be better off going to an under 14s where you're actually going to get half an hour every week to put some coaching into practice, and give yourself time to reflect on what you're coaching and what you're teaching, and the kids will appreciate it more as well. So yeah, that's one thing that's definitely come out of it, just a little bit of fear around where the role is going to come to and what happens if I say no.
It's another great point, man. You mentioned before about becoming the coach that you wanted to be. A lot of time I listen to these podcasts and think this is the advice that I will want to have heard at certain points in my career, and that is definitely one. Because I've got to say that when opportunities came up for me, there was none where I took that approach, where it was like, in a way, it was probably that you'd been offered something and you felt like you can't say no because you've been offered that opportunity. I'm sure a lot of people feel the same. So I think it's a great bit of advice. And to pick out the bit that I think was key with what you just said is having those values, personal values, written down before you're going in somewhere. Because I don't think people will take that reflection time to actually think about that. I think it'll just be the case if I'm going in, I'll try and do as well as I can. I'll try and answer the questions as well as I can in the interview, put myself across in the best light, see what happens. If I get offered it, cool. If I don't, that's fine. And not really go in with like having anything written down or prepared. So I think that's a great bit of advice, isn't it, Jordan? Like I'm not sure. I never did that. I don't know if you had anything similar that you did on going into an interview.
Yeah, really interesting that you raised this, and I don't mind sharing it as well, because I remember when I won't reveal the club, but I was offered a full-time role when I finished my degree, my undergrad. And I was in the exact same situation where I was like, oh my God, it's a full-time role in football. I've just finished my undergrad. Like, I've got to take it. I've got to take it. And the salary for it was £12,000 a year as a full-time role. And I was still convinced I'm taking it. I'll make it work. I'll make it work. And my parents just sat me down and went, what are you doing? Well, you can't accept that. You physically, we did the maths together, and they went, you can't actually physically live off that salary. And I know salaries are another issue entirely, but it was a case of, like you said there, Dave, I had nobody to say, you don't have to take that role, like you've got good experience already. And I had at that point, and I was thinking, oh, but it's a full-time role. I've just got to accept it. And very, very glad I didn't in the end, because it meant I went off and did something else. Went and got my master's and ended up in the Northwest, and ended up working for Liverpool Ladies and all this sort of stuff. So it was really beneficial that I didn't take that role at that time. But having somebody to say, yeah, maybe think about it before you just accept it is really, really important. So and again, it's the same with injuries. We don't understand the injuries. We never see the injuries we prevent. It's the same with what you're doing now, Dave. You probably might not see the mistakes that you help people not make. And there will be people that you're mentoring now, or people that are listening to you speak or whatever, who might be on the cusp of making one of those decisions that they might later regret. And actually you just going, well, actually, have you thought about this? Might just steer them down a better path. So, credit to yourself for putting yourself out there. Like you said, nervous that you're taking on people on board and all this sort of stuff. But it definitely will have been beneficial, I'm sure, because that sort of advice, like Ben says, is golden. When you're starting on your career, to have that sort of advice is exactly the sort of thing I wanted. And luckily, I got it from my mum and my stepdad at the time. So, a very, very important point of that. I definitely really think that.
It's lucky that Evie gave him the kick up the arse when she did, really, isn't it? To get that.
Yeah, we'll thank Evie for it. Yeah.
No, I just echo that, Dave. I think that's a great bit of advice, and this is exactly why people like yourself need to be engaging with coaches to put across the experiences that you've had, because I'm sure there's numerous other examples of conversations that you've had that you might probably not even think as being that bigger thing, but are going to definitely impact people going forward. Is there anything else that springs out in terms of challenges?
I think I'll probably flip this a bit. A lot of the feedback around the way I structured this. Sorry, I'll just give a bit of context. I started off, the first night was all about communication. Um, and looking at how people communicate, how people listen, how people learn. And what I did was we looked at I presented a couple of videos. So I gave a clip from the Arsenal documentary, and remember Arteta with the light bulb. I was kind of saying, look, he's very visual. I said, this is how he presents to get the attention of a room. And then what I did was I gave an example of a talk show host interviewing somebody and saying, right, now watch the space he gives people to talk, even when it's a 10-second pause. So just giving little examples of that around comms, and then kind of presenting a hierarchy around the first thing you need to do in this setting is learn how to talk to yourself and communicate with yourself. And that starts with not being afraid to say yes or no in given situations. It could then progress then to your comms with your physio, or who, that medical team, your manager, the club, the players, whatever kind of structure within. Then I kind of moved it on. It was a good way to do it because they all thought the first night was going to be, oh, he's going to give us all the secrets of an unbelievable pre-season. And I was like, no, look, let's start with this to get you thinking, because then it'll make everything else a little bit more relevant. But anyway, when we moved on then, and I did present some of the ideas that we put the team through in terms of a block of pre-season training, the feedback that came back from it was, oh my God, everything is so simple. And I so I asked them about that, and they said people tended to have a sort of a perception that at a high level, if you will, everything's really complex. So I thought that was interesting. And they said it came from seeing a lot of clips online that maybe had no context, and they found it very difficult to, if you were to ask, right, where does that fit in? In terms of a weekly training, where does that drill go in? They said they couldn't answer it. I don't really know. So it goes back to, well, look, make it about yourself. And I said, for me, I have a lot of anxiety issues right throughout my life. And I said, I need stability and I need to keep things simple. I said, if things start getting complex and detailed, I said, I struggle. I said, so with that in mind, I probably wouldn't be able to work for Liverpool. Do you know what I mean? I wouldn't be able to work with that level of detail. And I said, for me as a coach, to keep things as simple as possible allows me to do my work a little bit better. It probably results in a lot of repetition throughout the year. And I can live with that as long as it's done right. But don't be afraid of simplicity, and don't get overawed by kind of things that are complex and you feel, oh God, should I be doing that? Because every set and every environment is different.
Yeah. Another great point. I think the context is so key, isn't it? With clips like that, and that's where social media can sometimes be a bit confusing. But to take it back to what you mentioned at the start, we all know that, and speaking to people on our events, people are doing the same sort of foundational work anyway. So what clips say and what actually goes on, it can be very confusing, can't it? That which doesn't give you like a real picture a lot of the time.
Yeah, it's interesting because we'll all do different things. And as I just said, it's very easy for somebody you could just land in the middle of a training session and say, oh, Jesus, that's absolutely rubbish. I was like, well, you have to have context, what's been done on the day, on the week, on the month, throughout a year. So, but we've all had, I still have it. Sometimes you'll see something and think, oh God, should I be doing that? But I think just bring it back. I've probably mentioned the word a few times, like your values, your principles that are associated with the team. And as I said, one of mine is just simplicity, because it allows for a better delivery and a better execution. Leave the complex stuff to there's enough complexity when it comes to sort of strategy and tactics. So give them the headspace for that.
Yeah, and also that gives you then the confidence as a coach to deliver it in the right way. And you've also mentioned before about getting results with players. So if you're getting results with players and you're using that simple approach, if we call it that, then we can't really argue much more, can we? Like you're doing what you set out to do, which is really important.
Another great one for me, Dad. One of his life advice is do less but do it better.
Yeah.
And I've heard it a few times, but I suppose in certain settings it's very true, isn't it?
it's true in terms of what we do, but also what we say, like you mentioned before, isn't it? Like
Yeah,
we can take a coaching session, like you said before, and not short for the whole session, or we can be really precise and impactful with everything we say and not say that much. And I think, yeah, it's a great point. Really, really good point. We're coming up on time, which is mad because that's nearly an hour,
well, that's blue, boy.
which is mental. But Dave, we need to do another one. Let's not leave it as long next time because I feel like there's loads of topics that we could extend on off the back of this conversation. So I'd love to have you back on soon. But just before we wrap up, just give us a bit of detail on, is there another intake for the mentorship? And then also give us the details on how people can get in touch about that and just generally see the work that you do as well.
Yeah, so I'm just on the feedback I got. I'm building the mentorship with a little bit more kind of detail in it. So what I'm going to do with the next one, I'm going to bring some additional kind of practitioners on to give a little bit more insight, a bit like what we were saying here. So it's not just one voice. So that's sort of the plan. I looked at doing it earlier in the year, but it actually didn't seem to suit people because a lot of people were heading into pre-season, which is fine. So the plan would be I'm looking at sort of May to run another small cohort. So I'll share all the details when they're all finalised. But as I said, the main thing was just building it on the back of the feedback from the first one and letting it evolve that way. In terms of just, reaching me or anyone getting in touch, Instagram is probably my weapon of choice. It's performance_doc. And look, anyone, please do get in touch. I'm a serial networker. I wreck everybody's heads, but it's really important because, look, there's so many people that helped me when I started out. And for me, I don't agree with it's that kind of neoliberalist. I'm not doing something unless it's a benefit to me. I think in the industry we're in, we need to help each other. And I'm always happy to jump on a call or have a chat with anybody because, but like we said earlier, everyone's experience has value, whether you're at the start of your career or coming to the end of it with all the experience in the world. What we do goes back to, it's all about people and we can all learn from each other. So look, please, anybody who's wants to have a chat, absolutely. I'd love to hear from people.
Awesome, mate. Well, Dave, I really appreciate you coming back on, mate. It's been far too long and I think you covered some really key topics today, so I really appreciate your honesty and openness to share.
No, I really appreciate being asked back on, lads, because Jesus, the caliber of guests you've had on, it's been brilliant. So no, thank you very much.
Cheers, Dave.
Awesome, mate.
Thank you.
John, it was great to have David back on. Obviously, like I mentioned, he's given a lot of guests to the podcast that have covered some great topics, but he's obviously doing some great work himself as well, isn't he, with the girls team?
He is, and he covered a lot of topics there. A lot of topics which we could have a lot of rabbit holes off. I think just at the start when he was talking about the difference between working with players one-to-one and in group settings, the point he hit, which I thought really resonated with me, was that when you're working with players one-to-one or even just small group, like 2-to-1, like you've got to be so contextualized, and it might be actually like you said, you might have a player come to you and they've got exams going on, they've got 4 games this week, so your perfect, lovely, colour-coded plan has already gone out the window versus at a club. And I think it's those little skills which he talks about there, which I think are not the dark arts, but they're the little things which no one really tells you in the textbook again. Yeah. So he covered loads of those sorts of topics that you almost need to be a coach that can just think on your feet straight away. And that if you are getting players come to you one-to-one, it's like, right, actually, let's adapt everything I've just planned to suit you. And again, it's just that bespoke element to it. But then, like you said, in a team setting, it's not as bespoke, but there's still, can we get X player to here? Can we get Y player to here? Can we get Z player to here? Not everyone to this one singular point. So, and then he went into the mentorship stuff and everything as well. So, yeah, a lot of points there. We definitely need to get him back on because there's a lot of follow-ups I think needed off the back of that one.
I think a lot of the things he mentioned that seems probably quite obvious to him that he does on a day-to-day basis come from experience as well.
Yeah.
So like having that experience of just asking questions about what the players got on that week and adapting the session, however, by whatever means necessary. That comes from experience, doesn't it? And I think that's one of the keys, that he mentioned a load of things, even with like the structure of the session that he was doing with the player on the pitch.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, he didn't go into like a textbook answer, but he ticked off all the boxes of the things that we want to try and cover. And all that has come. And he said, didn't he, this is like the foundation, but then we'll change things and manipulate things however we need to from that point, because I'm getting feedback from it all the time. Like you mentioned about the double leg to single leg, little things like that, which seem quite obvious, but using that coaching eye, he's going to adapt things on the fly. And I think that, again, that just comes from hours and hours of coaching, hours and hours of experience working with different players. And that's one of the keys I took from that. Also, just the fact that he's using video, which is relatively simple, but like obvious as well at the same time, isn't it? Using match video, if you can do that, players are going to be really receptive to that as well. Because they'll start to see it exactly, and they feel it, don't they? They know then from the game what you're trying to improve. And then also the career-based stuff I thought was really vital and important to discuss. The saying no to the first opportunity. A lot of people listen to that and be like, what? Like this is the opportunity that I've been working towards. Like, why would I say no towards it? And your example was great. And again, lucky to have the advice that you got at that time, isn't it? But if you went without that advice, it could be a very different picture.
Exactly.
And that kind of ties in with the question that he brought up from our event in Manchester, wasn't it? On those small decisions at certain points in your career have just changed the trajectory of your career. And it's worth thinking about that sometimes, isn't it? Like the one thing that you maybe wouldn't have done that maybe wouldn't have led to that opportunity. And the lesson from that, I think, is that getting in those rooms and having those discussions with people, and this is not like just a push towards our events, but just doing it in general, you never know where that's going to lead to. And we had the perfect example at the Colchester event where James Russell, and we've released the clip now on YouTube so you can go and watch it. He talks about meeting a coach in that Colchester event 12 months prior. And now he was in the event this year, he was sat there in the same tracksuit working at the same club because he'd given him a job. And that's what it comes off the back of, isn't it? So loved it. I loved having Dave on the back on, and we'll definitely do it again soon. Loads more we can dive into around female health. He's obviously given us some links as well to people that we can reach out to. So we'll be reaching out soon. Very enjoyable, wasn't it?
Very good. Yeah, and I think the links that like you just mentioned there in terms of who we're going to get on off the back of that, I think could be really, really good. So watch your space. Keep your ears peeled.
100%. Just last thing, guys, make sure to go and check out the sponsors. They do incredible work. Go and give them a follow and show them some love because they make this podcast happen. So a big thank you to all of our sponsors. And Jordan, I'll speak to you again next week.
Yeah, speak soon. Look forward to it.